All right, we're continuing on with part two of courts, where we're going to get into some more important amendments and court cases. And we're kind of cross over with the cops and the courts. All right, first of all, we're going to get to know locally some courts and how they cross over and how important they are. And I'm going to relate them locally. All right, so locally we have the Ashland City Attorney's Office. So in every municipality, depending on how big they are, and Ashland's pretty little, it's only got a population of about 20,000. You're going to have a legal division. So in Ashland, you have a city attorney that represents and provides legal advice to the mayor, city council, parks, departments, and everything. Ashland even has a municipal court. So when you have the police department that goes out, and if they are writing citations to juveniles or they are writing traffic violations for people running stop signs or any other type of traffic violations, they're going to go to Ashland Municipal Court. And then Medford, since Medford is a different city, they have their own municipal court. And I just kind of copy and pasted from their municipal court of where it is and how they handle their own traffic citations and when it's open. They also handle their own circuit court matters, landlord-tenant disputes. They're a little bit larger of a city. They have about 80,000 people. Consumer complaints, they have their own Oregon State Bar Lawyer Referral Service and their own public defender's office. They also have a dismissable traffic violations. I copy and pasted this from their website as well. So if an officer pulls somebody over because they have broken brake light or fender or horn or tinted windows that are too dark or cracked windshield, all the person has to do is get that fixed, and then they can take it into this Medford, Oregon place, and it can get signed off, and then they will not get fined and it won't go against them. And here's just some more dismissible traffic violations. They also have a traffic school program. So I guess if this is one of your first tickets, you can go through traffic school and pay a fine for the traffic school, and it won't go against your record. And here's the qualifications for the program. And again, I highly recommend if it's your first ticket doing this, because a traffic citation can raise your insurance. If you want to go into law enforcement, they look at your driving record. So it's just really, really important on a number of things. So if you do get a speeding ticket or any type of traffic violation, definitely check into the jurisdiction where you got it. See if traffic school is an option for you. And then Jackson County, since Jackson County is the county, it has the Supreme Court, which is the highest court in Oregon. It has a court of appeals, and it has a tax court. All right, so now that I've kind of just covered courts, and that's going to be wherever you are. So I always tell people, if you get involved in the court system, no matter what jurisdiction you're at, you're going to have your municipal and city courts, and you're going to have your county courts, and all of those have resources. So reach out to them and find out what those resources are, especially with the internet now, and how much is available to find out on the internet. All right, now we're going to move into the amendments. And again, like I said, we're just hitting on these things. This is only a 10-week course, so on everything with your book combined. I'm counting on you to read your book. I'm not regurgitating your book to you. I'm adding to it. So I'm counting on you to read your book. I'm adding to your book throughout these PowerPoint presentations, and then with the extra readings that I'm giving you as well. But it's still not going to get all that we can cover within this 10 weeks. It's just not enough. So anyhow, we're going to move on to the First Amendment. So I'm going to expect you to know the First Amendment in the quiz. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution are known collectively as the Bill of Rights. The First Amendment states that Congress shall make no law prohibiting free exercise of religion or abridging the rights of free speech and peaceful assembly, and the police are frequently involved in protecting these rights. It is a fine line. And I normally ask students when we're in class, why would police get involved in the First Amendment? So I'll ask you right now to tell me, when would police get involved? Hopefully you're kind of thinking of the time of when people get violent. So for example, if you've ever driven by somebody that's picketing somewhere in front of a business, that's your First Amendment right to do that. However, if you start stepping into traffic or start prohibiting people walking by, that's when you're starting to get not peaceful, and that's when police can get called. All right, so again, this just kind of says if it gets to hate speech, fighting words, obscenities, things like that, that's when police intervention can get called, and that's when it turns not good. All right, so Fifth Amendment. I can tell you this is one of the most misunderstood of the amendments, and I think I can blame this on TV and shows because of how it's used in the shows. The Fifth Amendment, basically, you'll hear people say, I take the Fifth, I have the right to remain silent. And I used to hear this a lot when I would pull somebody over for a traffic violation. I would see somebody run a red light. My kind of thing on red lights was, I truly believe this because I had seen people killed from getting hit in an intersection in a car after being hit from somebody who ran a red light. So if I saw a light go green, yellow, red, and then the person went zoom through the intersection, I knew that the other light was green. So that's when I pulled somebody over. So if I saw it with my own eyeballs, like I said, if the person went green, yellow, red, and then zoom through the intersection, that's when I would pull them over. And a lot of times I would get people that would say, you have to read me Miranda. And so if you're saying that right now, you do not understand Miranda correctly. So you have to understand this, and I'm going to say that I will ask you a question like this on the quiz. There's basically two things that have to happen in order for Miranda to be invoked. And Miranda, the reason Miranda has its name through the Fifth Amendment is for a case, and the case is called Miranda v. Arizona, and you want to remember that. And it basically means two things have to happen, and you want to remember this. And those two things are, you have to be detained by police and not free to leave. We call these the two prongs. So you have to be detained by the police and not free to leave. So let's go back to me stopping somebody for running the red light. Yeah, if I was stopping them and getting ready to give them a citation for running a red light, they were detained by me and they weren't free to leave. So there's one prong, and they're right. That's one of the prongs. The second prong is I have to be interrogating them. Well, that second prong is not met because I'm not interrogating them. I saw them with my own eyes run the red light. I don't need to interrogate them because I saw them run the red light. I'm just going to write them a citation and we'll be on our way. So that second prong is not met. Normally you're interrogating somebody when you're trying to get a confession out of somebody, you see normally in the movies when when somebody's trying to find out if somebody committed a crime. So that's that second prong that's normally missing. So make sure you understand that about the Fifth Amendment. We'll cover it some more. We definitely cover it in the Introduction to Law Enforcement class. But like I said, it's kind of a misunderstood thing about Miranda and the Fifth Amendment. All right. The 14th Amendment, you want to understand this. It's referred to as the Due Process Amendment. It's very important. It states that no state can deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So it's the Due Process Amendment. It says that evidence of a crime can be presented in court and that both testimony and physical evidence is obtained according to the rules discussed previously. So it's the Due Process Amendment. And it's the Equal Protection Clause. All right. We are going to be focusing on the following 5 very, very, very important cases. Not only cases in a court of law, but cases, and I told you when we started this that, that we're going to have cops and courts kind of cross over. And that's because these are cases in a court of law that lawyers need to know and cases that cops have to know, because when cops are working, if they don't know these types of cases, then they can really mess things up. And what I mean by mess things up is they can get evidence thrown out, especially if they're trying, if somebody, for example, if there's a serial killer out there and they're working to get evidence against that serial killer, if they don't know these 5 things and a lot more, but they don't know these 5 things, the evidence can get thrown out. So they have to be very careful in what they're doing. So we're going to work and talk about, coming up next, the exclusionary rule, fruits of the poisonous tree, the good faith doctrine, inevitable discovery doctrine, and exigent circumstances. And by the time we're done here, I think you're going to know what each one of these are. If you don't know what they are now, believe me, you're going to know. All right, so we're going to start with number 1, the exclusionary rule, which all of these really fall under the umbrella of the exclusionary rule. It's basically a judiciary imposed requirement that any evidence obtained by the police using methods that violate an individual's constitutional right be excluded in criminal prosecution against the individual. So basically it says, when I was a cop, if I get any evidence that violates anybody's rights, that evidence is thrown out. So if I have a serial killer and I find the one evidence that the serial killer used that's going to convict that serial killer, that serial killer used to kill all his victims, if I basically obtain that evidence using methods that violated that serial killer's constitutional rights, that evidence is going to be thrown out per the exclusionary rule. So I have to make sure that I am following all of the rules, and I cannot violate anybody's constitutional rights. Okay, really important. So we're going to start out with the fruits of the poisonous tree. And this one's really important, and I like the name of it because it basically says, think about an apple tree or any type of tree. What's your favorite fruit, if you have a favorite fruit? If you have the tree, if the tree is poisonous, then all those apples on it are poisonous. So it basically says that if what the cop does is bad and unconstitutional, and if what the cop does violates somebody's rights, then the evidence that the cop finds is bad and has to be thrown out. So one case, and I'm going to ask you to remember this case, and I'm going to tell you about it, is Mapp v. Ohio. Okay, that gives you a great example of that. Okay, of fruits of the poisonous tree. So cops were actually out looking for a bombing suspect, and they go to Mrs. Mapp's house, and they think they're going to find evidence at her house, and they knock on the door, and Mrs. Mapp really does know her rights, and so they go, hey, we want to come in your house. And she knows her rights, and they don't have any right to be there. And she knows her constitutional rights. And she goes, you can't come in. They go, yes, we can. And she goes, no, you don't have a warrant. So they go, well, we'll be back with one. Well, I don't know why, but they come back a few hours later, and they don't have one. And she goes, let me see the warrant. And so they have a piece of paper. It's not a warrant. But they fold it up, and they put it in their pockets, and they don't give it to her because it's really not a warrant. And so they force their way in illegally. And they start searching, and they search everywhere, and they even go into the vehicle, and they find pornographic material in the vehicle. Not bombing material, but pornographic material, not good stuff. And they make some arrests. And they go back, and they get a good defense attorney. The defense attorney says, under the exclusionary rule, says, hey, those cops did not have a warrant. They violated the constitutional rights. And so therefore, even if that porn material is bad, it doesn't matter because it should be thrown out under the exclusionary rule because the cops didn't have the right to be there in the first place. And the United States Supreme Court said, you're right, and threw out all that evidence. All right, so then we've got fruits of the poisonous tree. And we've got another case is we have Wong versus United States, and we have Arterburn versus State. I'm going to tell you about Arterburn versus State. So Arterburn, he was hanging out near a parked car, and police stop him. And where he was hanging out wasn't a good place, so police just assumed he was doing drugs. He was a really nice guy, so he goes to the station. They say, hey, will you come with us? And he's like, yeah. And they're like, hey, can we search you? And he's like, yeah. Well, he has drugs on him. But he gave them consent, and when you give police consent to search you, hey, it should be okay, right? So anyhow, they arrest him for those drugs, and he gets a good defense attorney, and the defense attorney says, hey, they shouldn't have been allowed, those cops violated his constitutional right. The original stop that they stopped him was illegal. So that original tree was bad. So even though he gave them consent, that original stop was bad. So that fruit, those drugs that they found are bad. Called fruits of the poisonous tree. So it got thrown out. Those drugs, bad. The rest thrown out. He was released. All right. So look how much we've learned already. So if I go back here, you learned the exclusionary rule. You've learned the fruits of the poisonous tree. Now we're going to the good faith doctrine. So the good faith doctrine says that, hey, as long as cops are operating under good faith, meaning that as long as they're doing stuff that they don't know is wrong, and it turns out being wrong, as long as they do it under good faith, it's okay. So I'll give you an example. Hill versus California. So there was a robbery, and they go to an apartment, and they're looking for this guy named Hill. And they knock on the door, and there's this guy Miller there, and he fits Hill description, and they think it's Hill. They think he's lying because he's the robber, and so they arrest him. Okay, and they do a search on him, and he's got some drugs on him, and guess what? It's really not Hill. It's this guy named Miller. And so Miller sues him and says, hey, I want the drugs thrown out because I was Miller. I wasn't lying to you. And the Supreme Court said, the cops really thought you were Hill. You were in Hill's apartment. You fit Hill's description. The cops did make a mistake, but it was a good faith mistake. Anybody would have made that mistake because Hill had just robbed a bank. You fit Hill's description. You were in Hill's apartment. So that's called a good faith mistake. All right. We also have what we call exceptions to the exclusionary rule, which is the inevitable discovery doctrine. So that means that sometimes we might mess up. However, if that evidence would have been found inevitably anyway, it can still be let in. So sometimes let's go back to Map v. Ohio on that pornographic material. Sometimes a judge might say, hey, we had already developed Map as a suspect in the pornographic ring already. So even though you went into Map's house illegally with an illegal warrant and violated the Constitution, the constitutional rights, you already had Map as a suspect. So therefore, you were already going to find the pornographic material. So that's inevitable discovery. Well, that didn't happen in Map v. Ohio because they didn't even know about the pornographic material. But if they had already developed Map as a suspect, then that's where inevitable discovery doctrine would have come in. We also have the independent source doctrine, and it holds that illegally obtained evidence may be admitted if it was obtained through an independent source. That's kind of cool. So that basically says that if you have somebody that's not connected with the police, that's not an agent of the police, and they tell you that they give you independent information that somebody is dealing drugs or somebody's doing something illegally, it can be used in court, even if it violates somebody's rights. So that used to happen to us. We would have people that would call us and say, hey, somebody came over and I went through their purse and I found these drugs. And you're going, wait, you can't go through somebody's purse. I mean, cops can't go through somebody's purse. But a citizen can do that because they don't have the same level of knowledge of the Fourth Amendment that police have to have. We also have what's called exigent circumstances. So in exigent circumstances, officers can do things without a warrant because of fear of loss of evidence. So let me give you an example. Right now, if I had pulled somebody over that was driving under the influence of alcohol, if I wanted to get a blood test to prove that they were driving under the influence of alcohol and possibly drugs, I would have to get a warrant. And let's say that person we were out in the middle of nowhere and it was 3 hours away and we didn't have phone service. Well, every hour that goes by, that blood is working through and their blood alcohol level is going down. That would be exigent circumstances to take somebody's blood without a warrant because of the changing circumstances. So there's just sometimes exigent circumstances that I may need to force my way into a dwelling or force my way into a vehicle because things may change or evidence may be lost. All right. This is a tough subject, so I highly recommend you pause and go back and read through those court cases and really take the time to understand them. There's going to be an extra credit quiz that goes over these as well. So take your time to go back through again, like I said, and read through these cases and really understand these exclusionary rule, fruits of the poisonous tree, the good faith doctrine, the inevitable discovery doctrine, and exigent circumstances. All right, we'll see you on the next video series.